We're back in public session to begin our interviews. Again, I would remind the public, for fairness' sake, please do not let any of the interviewees know the questions that we are asking the candidates, because we will ask same questions of every candidate for the most part, and it would be unfair if anyone were to find out what the questions are before they sit down before us. Good morning and welcome.
Morning.
Mr. Paris-Condola.
Yes.
Thank you for coming. We have a series of questions. We have 7 questions for you, plus or minus, and expect that the interview will run roughly 15 minutes. So, Mr. Rascon.
Good morning. First question is, what level of importance do you place on fairness and equity as a judge, and how would you measure success in being fair and equitable?
First of all, thank you very much for this opportunity. I am excited. I'm a little nervous, so I apologize if that comes off. But to answer your question, the importance of fairness and equity, that's obviously very important. As a judge, we need to be fair at all times. We need to be fair to all parties. We need to be fair to not only the parties of the lawsuit, but the community, because in essence, the community is a party to every case. Equity, we should also be a court of equity, meaning we want to try to do the right thing at all times. So that is very important. How would I measure success? I would say I would measure success by the people that appear in front of me, and I'm assuming the question is as a judge, the people in front of me, what type of feedback am I getting from them, both positive and negative? Am I affording them the opportunity to be heard? Am I affording them procedural due process? Not only ruling on the case, but also making sure they were given an opportunity for their case to be heard fairly by an impartial judge. So how would I measure success? I would measure success by doing a good job, by protecting the community, by not having any complaints, by not having people complain. But it's not just about that, because sometimes being a judge, you have to do the unpopular things. And it's not about necessarily, just trying to do what you think everybody wants you to do. As a judge, one of the main things you have to do is you must be independent. And sometimes being independent and exercising your discretion may not be the popular thing to do. But at the end of the day, when you lay your head down at night, and it's like I do now as an attorney, both as a prosecutor and a defense attorney, did I do good today? Did I do justice today? Did I do the right thing today? And the right thing in one case may not be the right thing in another case. In the law, one size doesn't always fit all. So we have to find a right and just resolution for that particular situation under those circumstances.
Thank you.
Morning.
Your answer to this question could be one word. What element in your background and experience do you feel will be the most...
Craig, would you please turn on your microphone?
What element in your background and experience do you feel will be the most significant to becoming a great judge?
I can't answer that in one word, but I can, in that I would say the reason I will be a good judge is because of my reputation. Because of my reputation as a fair and open-minded individual. I mentioned previously that I prosecute and defend simultaneously. That makes me unique. That gives me a background. And when I mention my reputation, my parents taught me very early on in life, it takes a lifetime to build a reputation. One instance can tarnish a good reputation. So I'm mindful of that with everyone I'm dealing with, not only in court, but on the street, on the basketball court, when I'm coaching. So I'm mindful of that. So the one thing I would say is my reputation. And I do have a strong reputation, and I'm proud of my reputation. I'm proud of the fact that I have a reputation of being very open-minded. I have a reputation of being even-tempered. I have a reputation of doing justice. Again, as a prosecutor and as a defense attorney, it's not about prosecuting a case to the fullest extent of the law. It's about doing what's right. And I have a reputation of doing what's right. And the benefit of my reputation, the one word that I would describe that will show my background that I'm prepared for this, is I have a good reputation, so I will instantly have credibility on the bench. I will bring that same reputation, not as a defense-minded judge or a prosecution-minded judge, but as a fair-minded judge that's going to treat everyone with dignity and respect and give everybody procedural justice, not just guilty or not guilty, not just denying a motion to continue or granting an objection. So I would say the one word would be my reputation, which I'm very proud of.
Good morning, Tom. I went to law school with your brother, and surprisingly he has very nice things to say about you. Must have gotten along very well as kids. So my question is, Phoenix has a very diverse population. What strategies would you use as a judge to ensure that every individual that appears before you feels like they've been treated fairly?
I've been practicing law for 22 years. I've been practicing law in this specific court for 19 consecutive years. And that 19 years that I've been practicing in this court, I've done so with a full City of Phoenix public defender contract. And what that means is I've had 2 courtrooms at all times for 19 consecutive years. When I first started with the city, I was a very young man. So I've handled, I think if I had to guesstimate, over 5,000 cases for the City of Phoenix in my public defender capacity. And the diversity, as I see it with the City of Phoenix, is diversity could be your perspective. And again, I have a unique perspective. I have a unique perspective in of that I've been doing this for 22 years. I've been simultaneously prosecuting and defending for 19 years. And I've handled every case imaginable. Well, obviously that's a little bit of a tale, but I've handled so many cases that I can't even describe. But I've handled cases of all populations, meaning of all gender, all different classifications. And I've done so, treat everyone with respect and dignity. Growing up, again, my parents taught me early on to never presume or assume what someone else is going through. So have empathy for others. So the diversity, as far as how I treat diversity, I would treat them like I would want to be treated, with dignity and respect and fairness. I would make sure that they know that they're not just a number, and they're not just one person on my docket, a docket that in the City of Phoenix on a PDC day can be 45 to 50 people. I would call everyone by their name. I would address them, I would talk with them, I would never talk down to them. And I've been doing that for the last 22 years. It's not only what you say, it's how you say it and how you engage people. So that's the diversity that I bring and how I would treat diversity. Just the way I've been doing so my whole career, the way really I've been doing my whole life. Just try to treat everyone with dignity and respect and realize they're here because they made a mistake. They're not bad people. They made a mistake, and they're here to atone for that mistake and to move forward. So I would just be mindful of that each and every day, and not only each and every day, each and every case. So you can't let perhaps a bad experience with a person who maybe was disrespectful to the court and just assume the next person's going to be that, or take that into the next case. Every case is different. Every person it should be treated with dignity and respect.
Thank you.
Thank you. Judge Taylor?
Good morning. So what is the appropriate role, if any, in your mind that a court like the Phoenix Municipal Court plays in the community? And what do you think the appropriate role of a judge on the bench at the Phoenix Municipal Court would be in the community?
Well, in my opinion, the judges and the court are part of the community. If selected, I am going to be a judge not only when I'm on the bench, not only when I have the robe on, but at all times. When I'm out on the street, when I'm conducting my private affairs. So the role the judge should have in the community, and moreover the court, oftentimes the judge is the face of the court. Oftentimes the people interact with the judge, and their interaction with the judge is going to leave them with a positive or negative impression of the court and of the city. So whether I'm interacting on the bench or at home, I have to always remember that I would treat everyone with dignity and respect. And again, a judge has to give everyone not only justice, I know I'm repeating myself, but just procedural justice to treat everybody with fairness. And again, that obligation doesn't end as soon as I take the robe off and go home. So I think a judge is a part of the community, and a judge is also responsible for educating people on the law, not only in court, but when you're at home, or you're at the ball game, or you're taking a walk or a hike. So most people don't have experience with court, and that's a good thing. But it's up to the judge to actually educate people on justice, educate people what we do in this building, what types of cases we handle, how we're trying to do justice each and every day. And justice, again, could be a motion to continue. Justice could be release conditions. Justice could be ruling on a case. And justice could be when you're at the ball game, just having a conversation with the guy next to you, and they ask what you do for a living, and you tell them, and then you just kind of give maybe just a little information as far as what a judge do. A judge is there to do justice at all times and explain what justice is about. To, again, just try to succinctly answer your question, the role of the judge with the community, the judge is part of the community. The judge has a responsibility for educating the community, both on the bench and off the bench.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Periscola, I want to give you kind of a factual scenario and kind of tell me what you think about it and things that you see or how you would respond to it. As you know, the city of Phoenix has a jail court. In that jail court, pretend that you are the judge in that jail court, and that during that 11 o'clock hour, you have a pro per defendant come in who's charged with a domestic violence offense. Obviously, it's a victim case. As you're going over it, you indicate or you find that you believe you have some concerns with his mental capacity. And then he spontaneously says, I want to plead guilty, I want to get this over with. You as a judge, how would you handle that, and what are the things that you would look for?
Well, through my experience, I've had similar scenarios come up, both as a prosecutor and a defense attorney. Sometimes people think by pleading guilty, that's the easy way out, they just want to be done. But it's up to me as both a prosecutor and a defense attorney to say, well, slow down, not so easy. We need to go through the progressions. We need to make sure that you know what you're doing. We need to make sure that you're making a plea that would be knowingly, intelligently, and voluntarily done. As a judge, your responsibility is even more. As a judge, if I have someone that's pro per, first of all, they don't know their rights. And sure, it's up to me to try to explain their rights, but if we're dealing with someone with diminished capacity and I'm having an indicator of diminished capacity, then I need to slow the proceedings down, first of all, and I need to try to make sure that they understand what they're doing and understand what a guilty plea will entail. In my opinion, if that scenario came in front of me, I would probably enter a not guilty plea on his or her behalf, and then we would discuss release conditions. Certainly with release conditions, with what we're trying to do now is we're trying to make sure that the community is safe. So we're also trying to make sure that the victim is safe. And then we're trying to make sure that this person's going to return for court. So those are all the things I would take into consideration, because we don't want to hold him in custody. Unfortunately, in our legal system, we're holding people in custody for pre-adjudicated matters longer than they would serve if they were found guilty. And that's not fair, that's not right, that's not what we want to do. I also realize that as a judge, I have an obligation to the community, to keep the community safe. And by community, I'm not only talking about the victim, but we're also talking about the community at large. We don't always live in a comfortable place. We don't live in a place where everyone is law-abiding, especially when we're dealing with people with mental deficiencies. So obviously, to answer your question, I would explain to the person, and I would try to make sure they understand what they're doing. And as far as there's minimum mandatory consequences with a domestic violence conviction. There could also be, they may not be aware, there could be prohibitions regarding firearms. They may not be aware of that. So I would make sure that they know the facts. I would make sure that they know the minimum and mandatory penalties. I would make sure that they're aware of collateral consequences. And then rather than rush to judgment because it's the easier thing to do, I would probably reset it. And again, then the bigger issue, in my opinion, is release conditions. Because again, we don't want to hold that person in custody longer than necessary, but we also have an obligation to the public. So you would have to go through those progressions. And in my opinion, that's the more difficult question. I think under no circumstances would I accept a guilty plea under that scenario. So that's how I would handle that.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Paracastola. Congratulations on making it this far in the recruitment process.
Thank you.
My question for you is, I'd like for you to tell us about a time in your life where you've had an ethical dilemma and how that ethical dilemma and facing that changed you as a person.
I would say practicing law for 22 years, I've come across several ethical dilemmas. It's really not an ethical dilemma for me because I was taught at a very early age right from wrong. And I'm aware of the rules of professional conduct. I'm also aware of the canons that, if selected as a judge, that I would abide by. So they're really not ethical dilemmas for me. It's merely recognizing the dilemma and then doing what I'm required to do. And sometimes that's following the rules of professional conduct, but usually it's just following my personal conduct. I mentioned I was a defense attorney and as a prosecutor, and I've had a public defender contract here for 19 years. I also handle private cases, and it seems like sometimes when people hire you privately, they think they're paying for you to tell them what to say. They're there for you to tell them, how can you get out of this? So what do I need to say to get out of this? Unfortunately, also as a prosecutor, I had an officer show up one time for a suppression hearing and say, Tom, what do you need me to, what do you need? What do you need me to say? What are you looking for? And my response is, I'm looking for the truth. I'm looking for the facts. And if there's anything less than that, then you're in the wrong profession. So I actually mentioned to that officer that if he is going to stretch his credibility on this one case, he may be successful. But in the end, he's lost. Because again, it comes down to your reputation. If you lose credibility with a judge, you're done. If you lose credibility with me as a prosecutor, you're done. So, and ultimately that officer did the right thing, but unfortunately I had a different opinion of that officer. It also happens, to circle back to the private cases, private clients sometimes say, hey Tom, what do I need to say? You know, as far as the stop, hey, what if I said this? Well, no. You need to tell me what happened and then let me do my job. Let me have our defense based on the facts of the case. And if they're looking for someone to tell them what to testify to, if it's anything other than the truth, then I'm not the attorney for them. And that if that's what they want to do, I can't tell them not to, or pardon me, I can tell them not to, but I can't make them do the right thing. I can only advise them what they should do. And I would also advise them that first and foremost, I am an officer of the court, and I won't be a party to any unethical conduct. So it's that's just a scenario that seems to repeat in different ways, both in my role as a prosecutor and in my role as a defense attorney. And each and every time, no case is more important than being an officer of the court, than being truthful and doing the right thing. Because at the end of the day, when I lay my head down at night, I go through my day, did I do good today? Did I do the right thing today? And even suggesting what someone should testify to is not doing the right thing, and it's not what I'm about. It's not what the rules of professional conduct allow, and it's just not what my moral compass allows.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sir, we will see many highly qualified candidates today, like yourself. Real briefly, what do you believe is the one thing in your experience or training or background that sets you apart from the others?
Well, Judge, I think the one thing that really sets me apart, everyone's qualified. Everyone does a good job with what they do. What makes me uniquely qualified for this job is, first of all, I've been working in this court for 19 years. I've had a full City of Phoenix public defender contract for 19 years. So I already have all the relationships. I already have the respect from the judges, from the prosecutors, from the defense bar. I know how to analyze a case from a defense perspective. I also know how to handle a case from the state perspective. So very few people have the ability to look at both sides of a case simultaneously. That's what I do every day. That's what I've been doing every day for 19 years. Because again, I simultaneously prosecute and defend. I've been prosecuting in the town of Carefree for 19 years now. So I am their town prosecutor, meaning I handle everything from start to finish on a case. I order the reports, I review the reports, I order the criminal histories, I review the criminal histories, I make victim contact, I discuss the case with the victims. I try to craft a fair and reasonable and just plea offer. At that point in time, I also negotiate the case from the state perspective. Oftentimes, I'm dealing with unrepresented parties, which is what judges in the City of Phoenix do probably the majority of the time. I talk to people with dignity and respect, and I talk with them again and not down to them. I try to explain things in easy to understand terms and language, and I do that with a point of view to try to find fairness, to try to find a just result for that particular case. Again, I mentioned I've been prosecuting in Carefree for 19 years. In addition to that, I'm the city prosecutor of El Mirage. I've been doing that for 12 years. And I'm also the Cave Creek town prosecutor. I've been doing that for 4 years. Again, simultaneously defending my full public defender contract in Phoenix. I also offer defense contract work for the town of Paradise Valley. I also do private work throughout Maricopa County, sometimes Flagstaff. I have roots in Flagstaff. So it's my ability, my unique perspective, to be able to analyze a case from all angles is what makes me highly qualified. It's also what separates me from everyone else that you'll probably interview today. So that gives me the unique perspective. And it's not just prosecuting and defending, it's all the people I encounter during that time. It's the same thing a judge does. A judge encounters high-volume courts. The City of Phoenix is a high-volume court. I deal with high-volume calendars on a daily basis. Sometimes I prosecute and defend on the same day. Certainly not in the same court, of course not, but I'll be in Carefree in the morning, I'm in the City of Phoenix in the afternoon. I'll be in El Mirage in the morning, I'll be in Scottsdale in the afternoon. So it gives me a unique perspective, it gives me a unique viewpoint. And again, it's not just my perspective and viewpoints, it's all the people that I've encountered on both sides. So some prosecutors just sometimes don't understand the effects, the collateral consequences a conviction can have on someone. For instance, driving on a suspended license. That can have driver's license ramifications. Driving without insurance, that has a mandatory minimum $1,000 fine. For some people, that's insurmountable. And it's just gonna trigger a loss of license. It's gonna trigger them missing a payment. It's gonna trigger just negative repercussions. So with me, I see how that impacts people. Why? Because I also handle it from the defense perspective. So I'm always looking to problem solve. My whole career, I've tried to problem solve. And I consider myself a very successful person. And I'm successful at what I do. Why? Because more than anything else, I care. And I have the unique experience. I have the unique viewpoints.
Thank you. Thank you very much for appearing before us, and we're grateful for your time.
Thank you. Thank you all. I really appreciate the time to interview. I'm excited. I've been with the city of Phoenix as a public defender, I mentioned, for 19 years. I've been practicing in private practice. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, sir. Before we move on to Mr. Allen, is there an issue with, how's the system going? Okay, so we're fine with that. So we can proceed with Mr. Allen. Is the sound okay? Doing okay? All right, thank you. You want to continue to go in the same order, or do you want to? Let's start with Alistair. What do you all think? Sure. I'm thinking, yeah, let's start with Alistair this time. Okay. Mr. Allen, welcome. Have a seat. It's always nice to see a face after hearing all about a person. Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Allen. We have a half dozen or so questions for you. We expect the interview will take 15 minutes or so.
Okay.
So, Ms. Adele.
Good morning, Mr. Allen. Congratulations on making it this far in the process.
I appreciate that.
My question for you is, I'd like for you to tell us about an ethical dilemma that you've faced in your life, whether it's personal or professional, but also tell us how it changed you as a person.
An easy one to think of, a difficult one to answer and say it loud. I have had an ethical dilemma that I've had to deal with professionally. I was, I think in my early years as a prosecutor, was assigned a case, was assigned a case. It was a very serious felony case. I think it was my first serious felony at that level where I would be trying it solo. I worked the case, and being a new attorney, probably overworked the case, but that was a good thing because in researching the case, I interviewed the witnesses, and I discovered that the wrong person was in custody, and then found that for a second set of charges that there were some integrity issues with the police report. At that time, the office that I worked for, I apologize,
Get some water there?
It might make it worse.
Oh, sorry.
The office that I worked for at the time, there was a policy in place for cases at that level, they could not be dismissed without approval from a certain level. I went to my supervisor and mentor to get that approval. I don't believe that person was unethical in any way, shape, or form, but dismissed my complaints as just being a new attorney that was afraid to go to trial. And so my concerns fell on deaf ears. I eventually went over that person's head, which had its own issues, went over that person's head to speak to another mentor, who in hindsight I realized was testing my character when he said, well, you are correct, this case doesn't need to be dismissed, but that's on you, I'll leave you to decide how to handle this. At that point in my career, I felt like I had just been left in the wind, and I had to make a very difficult decision. There were some intervening facts. Ultimately, it ended with a staff meeting in which I had drafted a motion to dismiss and my letter of resignation and said I would not leave the room until they had signed off on one of them, but that I would not do the trial because that person was sitting in custody while we were debating this. That changed who I am as a person and as an attorney and later as a judicial officer because I felt that I put my career at stake, my job, to do the right thing. It taught me that justice was the utmost importance, not doing the right thing for the particular office environment that you were in or succumbing to what I viewed as peer pressure. There was a statement made to me in that process, not by anybody as a supervisor, but try them all and let the jury sort them out. And I disagreed with that because there was a guilty man, an innocent man, sitting in custody pending his trial, and I knew for a fact that we as the government had arrested the wrong person. So that shaped how I view justice. Excuse me. I'm good, thank you. Okay. Thank you.
All right, good morning, sir.
Morning.
I have a little bit of a factual hypo I just want you to listen to and then kind of tell me how you'd respond to that or how you would handle those issues.
Yes.
Assume that you are a City of Phoenix judge down in the jail court. It's 11 o'clock at night, and you have a pro per individual come before you. That individual has been charged with a domestic violence offense, so it's a victim crime, and he comes up to you. As you talk to him, you think in your mind that you believe you have some issues with regarding his competency to proceed, but he is adamant that he wants to plead guilty and resolve that case. So how would you handle that situation?
Interesting question. I would continue to speak with the individual, and I'd have to make my own assessment. I don't believe that I could accept his guilty plea if I felt that he was not doing so knowingly and voluntarily. I would then have to make the appropriate decision on how to proceed with the case. And I apologize. Did you say it was at the arraignment?
Correct, jail court.
Okay. I just want to make sure I heard the facts correctly. I would enter not guilty on his behalf and then set the next date, and if appropriate, make a decision as to whether it would be appropriate to send him through a Rule 11 screening.
So if he was adamant that he wanted to plead guilty and get that matter over with at that time, what would you tell him?
That if I truly felt that he was not aware of the circumstances in which where the case was, I would enter not guilty on his behalf and assign counsel. And if he so wanted to choose, he could make his guilty plea at another time when it would be appropriate, if I felt that he was not aware of the circumstances or in a sound mind to make any decisions.
Thank you, sir.
Ms. Taylor.
Morning, Mr. Allen. Good morning. What role, if any, do you think a court like the Phoenix Municipal Court has in the community? And if there is a role, what is it? And as part of that, does that mean that individual judges on the bench have a role to play in the community?
Yes, I do think very much that the court has a role in the community. A municipal court in any city, Phoenix in particular, it's a physical manifestation of justice. It's the building where people go to find justice. It's their forum. I think the judges that work in a court, I hate to use the term, are cogs in a wheel. They are the human bodies that see that the system keeps moving. So the judge's role is to ensure that the public sees that that courthouse, that court system is fair and open to everyone, and that it's an appropriate jurisdiction or forum, where people's voices can be heard. They may not like the resolution of their cases, but that the courts constantly serves for justice and fairness. I believe that the public, someone who's not a member of the legal community, looks at a courthouse as the building where the system is. And I use the term system in quotations. And so the courthouse needs to be a place where they feel that, yes, that's the system, but it's where they can go find justice.
Good morning, David.
Good morning.
So Phoenix has a very diverse population. What strategies would you use as a judge to ensure that every individual that appears before you feels like they've been treated fairly?
The strategy I implement in the proceedings that I adjudicate now, I ensure that everyone knows that it is a safe space, that they are welcome there, that their voice will be heard. I do believe, particularly when dealing with a diverse population, you need to ensure that there's adequate access to the courtroom, the physical access, and to the facilities. I personally work to make sure that everyone feels like they've had an opportunity to be heard. That's done through ensuring that there's appropriate courtroom demeanor is adhered to, that people don't speak over one another, and that everyone is explained the process and given their rights to due process.
Thank you.
Good morning.
One word answer. What element?
That's unfair.
I gotta be consistent.
Okay.
What element in your background and experience do you feel will be the most significant in becoming a good judge?
Disposition, if you wish me to limit it to one word.
Good answer.
You can elaborate on that.
Okay, I didn't know how serious he was with the one word limitation.
The chair allows you to elaborate.
I was trying to adhere to the rules. My pleasant disposition, I have been told, I sincerely believe that I work to project a sense of calm, fairness, kindness, even, as some people have told me, but pleasant disposition. I like to project a calming demeanor with the people that I interact with, so that I am approachable, so that people feel that they can discuss an issue with me. I'm even-handed, even-keeled, measured in my responses. I believe that that's something that I bring to the bench. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Allen.
Good morning, Mr. Escobar.
What level of importance would you place on fairness and equity as a judge? And how would you measure your success in being fair and equitable?
I think it's of the utmost importance. I think having judiciary in which justice and fairness are not the utmost importance, it undermines the whole purpose and process. In anything that I do as a judicial officer, I ensure that there is justice, fairness, and equity. I do that by ensuring that all sides have a fair and appropriate opportunity to be heard on the issues that are before the court or the judicial officer. Even if that includes limiting the issues so that in terms of judicial efficiency and economy, that there's sufficient time to do that. But I don't believe that any court is doing its job if it's not a court that is known for its reputation for equity, fairness, and justice for everyone that appears before that body.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We are going to be talking to a number of very qualified people today in addition to yourself. To kind of sum up, what would you like to tell us? What would you like us to keep in mind about why you are set apart from the others in terms of being qualified for this position?
Thank you. I don't envy the task that this board has. You will interview a lot of qualified people. I don't disparage anyone's qualifications that's going through this process. I can't compare myself to the others. I haven't met all the others. I couldn't tell you why I'm the best out of the other candidates, but I could tell you why I believe that I'm a good candidate for you. I have the technical qualifications experience. I've worked as an administrative law judge where I adjudicate sworn testimony evidentiary hearings on a daily basis. I'm intimately familiar with Title 28. So unfortunately, I think I still have dreams about Title 28 on some days. I understand that that would be, that influences, or it's a great part of the court's calendar. I do DUI cases on a daily basis. I've had prior experience as a trial attorney, comfortable handling a courtroom, familiar with the rules of evidence, how a matter should or should not be handled. And I also have prior municipal experience, having worked as a commissioner at the city of Tempe. So my technical qualifications, as all of you I'm sure have had an opportunity to review my resume, speak for themselves. What separates me, I think, from other candidates is my background and my personality. I believe I've come from humble beginnings. I worked very hard to get where I've at in the career, as anyone that's made it at this point in their career. But for me, that's helped shape my personality to the point that some people feel that I don't take anything serious because I am always in a good mood. But for me, it's a matter of perspective. While the situation may be serious, I recognize calmer heads should prevail, and it allows people to work through their issues, whether it's a social or personal issue, or even more so in a courtroom. And as a judicial officer, I recognize that being the calm person in the room it portrays and projects to others the importance of being calm, speaking fairly to one another, and working through whatever the issue is within the framework that the law provides. As a judicial officer and a candidate for this position, I believe that's something that sets me apart, is that I recognize the importance of doing that in each and every case, particularly in a court like the city of Phoenix, where it's a high-volume court. I understand that the volume that has to be processed, but I understand the importance of working efficiently and judiciously, but always taking the time to remember that regardless of how many cases on the calendar and how similar those cases may be, each one is unique because each one represents a human being and the impact that will have on the community and the lives of the people that are connected to that person. And I never forget the human element of the people that appear before me in any of the cases that I preside over.
Thank you. Thank you for your time this morning. We're grateful for your answers.
Okay. Thank you for this opportunity. It was a pleasure meeting all of you. Same to put a face to some of the names for those of you I didn't know. So thank you and good luck to all of you. And have a good day, because I know you have a long day ahead of you. Thank you for this opportunity.
Bell is, I'm sorry, Mr. Smith, no, Judge Lusang is next up. Lauren? How's the flow go? I kind of like asking the ethical first. Kind of gives them a... Good morning, Judge, and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. We have a half dozen or so questions for you this morning. We expect the interview will run in the neighborhood of 15 minutes or so. So if you're ready, we'll proceed. There's water there. That's yours if you'd like it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Ms. Adele.
Good morning. Congratulations on making it this far in the process. My question for you is, I'd like for you to tell us about an ethical dilemma that you faced in your life, and it could be personal or professional, but also tell us how it changed you as a person.
Well, I have encountered ethical dilemmas on the bench, nothing very significant. I had a situation where I was prepared to do a trial, and the defendant I knew him as initials. I didn't know his first name. I knew his last name. He happened to be our landscaper. And the day of trial, he recognized me, he recognized my name, and I obviously could not sit and preside over his trial. At that point, I just recused myself and got another judge to handle the matter, which ended up pleading out anyway. Didn't know him very well, but he was someone who had been at my house on a somewhat regular basis. We were redoing our landscaping, so he was there quite a bit. He dealt with my husband most of the time. I don't know that that changed me as a person, though, or as a judge, because I'm just I'm quite aware of potential conflicts of interest. I used to be a public defender. I was a public defender for a long time, and I have a really good memory. So I've had a lot of situations where individuals had come into my court, and maybe it means I wasn't that successful because these juveniles were now adult offenders, and I well aware of if I recognize someone, I would definitely recuse myself. But I don't think that it's changed me. I'm just quite aware of the ethical rules and the appearance of impropriety, and we have to be vigilant on the bench. We have to be very well aware of that.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Morning.
I have a factual scenario for you. I just want you to listen to the factual scenario and then kind of tell me how you would approach that situation or any other issues that you see with it. So assume that you are a City of Phoenix judge, that you are appearing down in the City of Phoenix's jail court, which is a 24-hour court, and it's in the middle of the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, say, and you have an individual come before you. That individual is charged with a domestic violence offense, so it's a victim crime. And as you go and talk to that individual, you have some questions about their competency to proceed. But that individual is also adamant that he wants to plead guilty and get this matter resolved. How would you handle that situation, and what do you see are issues within that factual scenario?
I'd handle it very calmly because I've encountered those types of situations. I would explain to the defendant that he cannot plead guilty, and the rules say unless a judge can enter a plea on behalf of the defendant, and that's what I would do. I would explain that I wouldn't take his plea, and because it is a victim case, it's not likely the victim would be present at any rate. So even if the victim were present, however, if I have any concerns about the defendant's competency at all, I would not adjudicate anything at that point, because we have to be aware if a defendant pleads guilty, it has to be knowing, voluntarily, intelligently done. And they can't do that if they're incompetent. I've had situations where a defendant is adamant about representing themselves. But there's the issue of competency, and I explain, you can certainly represent yourself once a determination is made that you are competent to represent yourself. And you just need to be calm and explain. I think the more you explain things to people, they may not agree with you, but they may understand it better.
Thank you.
Good morning, Judge. A multi-part question for you. Do you think that a municipal court has a role to play in the community? If so, what is that role? And then what do you think is the role of an individual judge in the community?
The municipal court absolutely has a role in the community. I believe 92 or 93% of cases get resolved in a limited jurisdiction level. Limited jurisdiction court is the face of the community. We see victims, we see defendants, we see people charged with civil traffic offenses, we see jurors, and as a limited jurisdiction judge, municipal court judge, what people see when they come into our courtroom, regardless of why they are there, that's what they go and they talk to their friends and family about. Limited jurisdiction, yeah, the jurisdiction's limited, but it's incredibly important because I believe we are the face of justice. And one of the things I used to do is I used to go out in the community and teach driver's ed classes. I'd interact with, 15, 16-year-olds, and as a matter of fact, one was so, I think, impressed that a judge would take the time to come and address the class that 4 years later, I'm still in contact with him. He's at ASU now, and he comes and he, before I retired, he would come and watch court, and we talk about so much. We talk about his plans. He's the first in his family to go to college, and he's changed his major a couple of times. And I think that because I went in the community and I met him and I indicated I would be willing to mentor him to some extent, even though he may not ever be a lawyer or a judge, that made a huge difference because his friends and family know that judges are real people too, and we need to be involved in the community.
So, Judge, you've just retired after a long career on the bench in the city of Mesa. Why are you interested in joining the bench here in Phoenix?
Okay, in Mesa, the way it works is you have to let Mesa know 6 to 7 months. Well, I could have retired at any time. I could have retired a couple of years ago, but I always finish when I start. So in December, I was asked if I wanted to be reappointed, and we have to go through the entire process. We have an interview. It's not like other cities. We fill out an application. We have an interview such as this. And in December, I said, my term is ending June 30, 2018, and I informed the board that I did not want to be considered for reappointment. Well, I took my first 2-week vacation in my entire life in April 2018. And I came back from vacation. I went back to work on a Wednesday. I was so eager and so happy to be back on the bench. We worked 7 to 6 in Mesa. I used to work 7 to 6, and I was always on the bench at 7 o'clock. By 7:05, I was seeing someone. I was helping him resolve his issues. And at that point, and this was in April, early May, I realized that I had decided to retire when my term ended, but I wasn't quite ready, and then this opportunity came up, and I like being on the bench. I think I have a lot more to offer as a judicial officer, so that's why I decided to apply for the position when it came available.
Thank you.
Good morning, Judge. Phoenix is a very diverse population. What strategies would you use as a judge to ensure that every individual that appears before you feels like they've been treated fairly?
You listen. The most important thing for a judge is to listen, to make eye contact. I've had a really good 20 years on the bench, and I think I handle diversity very well. We see so many different types of people, and diversity, traditionally you think gender or race. Diversity is much bigger than that. Diversity deals with background, it deals with urban versus rural. That's a diversity issue. There's so much with regard to diversity, and the most important thing is to listen to what the person in front of you is saying, to be engaged. And one of the ways that you prove that you're listening is by repeating what they've said so they know you've heard what they've said. I can handle just about any individual who's come before me. And after 20 years of bench, I've never had disruptive, unhappy defendants. And being a judge, someone is always unhappy because that's the nature of the process. But even though people may not ultimately like the conclusion if someone is found guilty, because I have listened to them, considered what they've had to say, they've always accepted my ruling.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Morning.
What element in your background and experience do you feel will be the most significant to become a great judge?
Well, I think my experience. And even though I have 20 years of judicial experience, I can tell you that there are still challenges to being on the bench. You just never get it all, and I like that challenge. And one of the things I realized is that I need to find the answer to things. And I used to mentor new judges, and still do to some extent. I get phone calls, and it may not be my area of expertise, but I've always been able to respond to questions with regard to even, parts of the law, civil. I've never been a civil practitioner, but I taught new judges for 13 years, and part of that was Justice Court, which is civil proceedings. So I'd get calls from individuals who were asking me questions regarding what goes on in Justice Court. I've never sat in a Justice Court bench, but I would find the answer. I would direct them to where to go to find information. So I drill down. I want to find the answer. So I love to research, and I like new challenges.
Mr. Driscoll.
Good morning.
Morning.
What level of importance do you place on fairness and equity as a judge? And how do you measure your success in being fair and equitable?
Fairness and equity, that is what being a judge is all about. And how you measure it is how the people before you react. If you're able to explain what you're doing and why you're doing it, and treat everyone with respect, and every person who comes before me, that case is important. It may be misdemeanor court, limited jurisdiction court, but that, let's say a suspended license case, is very important to that individual. And again, it's the results. I have not had defendants upset when they're adjudicated. They're not, because they feel that the system works, they've been treated fairly. Again, they may not like the fact that they've been convicted, but once they've sat through the proceeding and I've talked to them and made my ruling and listened, they're satisfied that they have been treated fairly.
Judge, you are aware, I know, that there's a big community of other judges in Arizona, and we often have healthy debates among us about the law. Can you recall any occasion in which you have had a disagreement with other members of the judiciary about a legal issue, and how you resolve that issue?
I think we can all agree to disagree, and I have had legal discussions. Not everyone, we all can't agree, because if that were the case, then we wouldn't need people, we wouldn't need judges. It's an interpretation, and people hearing the same facts can interpret what it is that they're hearing differently as well. And I respect other people. If they have a position that's, other judges have a position that's not the same as my position, we talk about it. And sometimes I'm wrong. And I think we have to admit that we may approach a situation or see a set of facts and have one opinion going in, but I think we need to be open to discussion and seeing where we could be wrong, or maybe if we're not wrong, both positions are right. I've taught so many new judges, and we've had disagreements, and when it's new judges, it's not necessarily someone who's new to the bench. Sometimes they had been on the bench for a very long time. Some of them have had more experience than I had when I started teaching them. And they would, again, we would get into these friendly debates, and we would learn from each other. It's all a matter of the discourse and listening and considering and learning. I've never been in a position where I felt that someone taking a position different to my position was just absolutely positively wrong and wouldn't be able to see, from their perspective.
Thank you. In conclusion, as you know, we're interviewing many highly qualified candidates, such as, including yourself today. What would you like to leave us with in summary of what is it about you think that sets you apart?
I am completely dedicated and committed to public service. I always have been, and as I look back on even my years when I was in college, I volunteered, and before college, I've always been a community volunteer. Before I could actually work, I volunteered at a neighborhood center, with little kids. I was 12. I went down the street and I helped them make crafts, and then I worked in a library. And in college, I volunteered at what I now know was a rehabilitation treatment center for boys. Little did I know that 20 years later I would be, representing individuals in a rehabilitation treatment center. But I just have an absolute commitment to the community. I've gone to schools and I've read to kids. I've had lunch buddies. I'd take my lunch hour and we'd go and we'd have lunch. And I just want the community to be aware of all of the opportunities that everyone who lives in this country has, the aspirations. And I think I do that by going out in the community. And again, community involvement is very important. And my commitment to the community is what I feel, I don't know if it sets me apart, but I am very passionate about that.
Thank you. Thank you for your time this morning. Thank you for coming down to appear before us, and we enjoyed our conversation with you.
Okay, thank you.
So our next candidate is Mr. Smith. Well, we're good? We're good on time, everyone? Am I okay on that? Yeah. Yeah. Mr. Smith.
Morning.
Welcome. Thank you for coming. We have about a half a dozen questions for you this morning. We expect the interview will run in the neighborhood of 15 minutes or so. So, thank you. Adele?
Good morning, Mr. Smith. Congratulations on making it this far in the process. My question for you is about an ethical dilemma that you have faced in your life. So tell us about one, whether it's personal or professional, but also how it changed you as a person.
It is professional. The ethical dilemma that I faced was on the job, and it was a situation where there was a desire to go after a particular property, a particular activity that was happening in the city, and involved a lot of meetings with my boss, with individuals, different departments that wanted to address the situation at a property, and ultimately looking at the facts of the case, discussing what was going on in the neighborhood, what was going on at that particular property, assessing all of that. I didn't feel there was a basis for a criminal prosecution. And so that was quite a challenge because, again, there were city departments involved. It went all the way up to actually my boss at the time, the city prosecutor, who wanted to pursue activity on this property. And we had lengthy discussions, and ultimately, I didn't feel comfortable going forward. And I explained that I didn't have an ethical basis to pursue a criminal action on that property. And it ultimately was decided that someone else would handle the case, and that was very tough. That was hard to do, a bitter pill for me to swallow, but it's a situation where I thought it was appropriate, laid out all the reasons for why I didn't think we could proceed to that level, and I didn't feel comfortable doing it, and again, that was hard at the time to do.
Thank you.
I have a factual scenario to relate to you. I just want you to listen to the factual scenario and then tell me how you would handle that decision, how you would handle that situation, and if you see any other issues or anything else that you think would be important to that situation. So assume that you are a City of Phoenix judge. You're over in jail court. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. An individual comes before you. That individual is charged with a domestic violence crime, so it's a victim offense. And as you talk to that individual, you get the sense that there may be some competency issues. But that individual is also adamant that they want to plead guilty, get the case over with today, and resolve the matter for everyone's sake. How would you handle that situation, or how would you describe how you would approach that?
Well, Your Honor, how I would approach that is I would carefully assess the individual, and if I would hope possibly that there was advisory counsel or some sort of counsel, either a prosecutor or defense counsel, that might have had some contact with the individual and relayed their concerns. If it was just based on what I was seeing, I would not feel appropriate. I would talk to them at length, and also at the jail court, if there are any care providers that might have had some time. I know that at our IA court, and sometimes there's individuals that have the time to talk to them and give a brief assessment, but I would ultimately not feel comfortable going forward, because if the individual has any question about their competency, it's not going to be effective plea, effective disposition of the case, and it's not right to go forward with it. And so even though I understand the individual wants to go forward and conclude the matter at the time, it's clearly not appropriate if there's any questions with their competency, and I would have it reset. I would have counsel appointed for them, and also make sure that it's clear that they need to get some evaluation and to get services. But again, it's not appropriate to go forward if I have any question in my mind about their competency. It's not going to be a valid plea at all.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Smith.
Morning, Your Honor.
You have practiced in the Phoenix Municipal Court for a number of years. My question is a multi-part question. Do you think that the court has a role to play in the community? If so, what do you think that role is? And then what do you think the role of a judge on the bench is in the community?
Your Honor, yes, I think the court has a role in the community, and I think what that role would be is multifaceted. It would be to help in the cases that come before the court to make sure that there is a disposition on that particular case that is tailored to the case, but it keeps in mind the interests of the community, the safety of the community, and the best interests of the community. How it would also translate for the court being involved in the community, I think it's important for the court to have contact with the community, maybe in public education, like to talk to the community about some of the things that the court's currently doing. That I'm very impressed with what our court does with the specialty courts, with the customer assistance program. I think those things, and I know you're already doing that, there's already videos out there. It may not be able to get out any better, but even to go out to community groups and to give presentations on it through maybe South Mountain Community College, different things like that, different neighborhood groups. So I think it's important for the court to reach out that way. I think the way the court could do it too, so there's no any sort of issue is also reach out, maybe have programs, educational with what happens in court with the public defender's office and the prosecutor's office, for example. There could be situations where you're giving presentations about what's going on in the court. For the particular judge how to be involved in the community, I think that the judge should take the time as well to get involved. I've had experience working in our community prosecution area, been involved in the community. I think as a judge, if you do it appropriately, you still make sure there's no appearance of impropriety. You can go to occasional community, when time permitting, to go there in terms of education for the community to let them know what the court is doing. And again, I put that all with a grain of salt that I know there's very good things with Phoenix Channel 11 that you're already doing with the message about the things that the court's doing, but I don't think you can ever do that too much, because what I just want to add, and don't want to go on too long, is that I think what's really important for us to have with our courts is to keep the public confidence in the courts. What's happened nationwide, and it's not an issue with our court, but I think the public sometimes are still maybe distrust when they first come into a courtroom. And so I think the message that's gotten out to the community about all the things that are being done for individuals that have specific needs where the specialty courts could help them out, that message should be conveyed to the community by the judge and the court.
Morning, Bob.
Good morning.
Phoenix has a very diverse population. What strategies would you use as a judge to ensure that every individual that appears before you feels that they were treated fairly?
I think it's important, and what my strategy would be, number one, is to listen. I think that that's paramount as a judge, that you need to have a good listening ear, and you need to treat everybody with dignity and respect, have compassion. But I think at the end of the day, what an individual is looking for, I look at how I'd want to be treated. I think that's kind of my rule of thumb, is how I would want to be treated. I think what people are really looking for is a full and fair opportunity to be heard. And they want that to be an impartial opportunity to be heard. So how I would treat it is, transitioning from a prosecutor to judge, it wouldn't be that different. I treat everybody that I come into contact with dignity and respect. I don't judge them by anything, by their race, by their gender, age, youth. I think you treat them all with respect. And with that diversity, you want to make sure that you are taking that all into consideration. When you listen to a case, hear a case, listen to the facts, and then have a tailored disposition to that particular case that you're dealing with, taking into account, again, all the facts, the victim, the defendant, and to make sure a disposition is fair with that case. And you have, the idea is hold the person accountable and ensure compliance with the law in the future, hopefully.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Morning.
What element in your background and experience do you feel will be the most significant in becoming a good judge?
I think the element would be my experience with people, working with people in a diverse area throughout my career. In the prosecutor's office, I've had the fortunate opportunity to work in every bureau in our office. And what I mean by that real quickly is it's our charging bureau. We assess cases as they come in, work with police officers, victims, make sure victim rights are complied with. I worked in our community prosecution, and I think that's helped a lot with community prosecution, to be out in the community and to really work with diverse groups, city departments, neighborhoods, all sorts of individuals. And then in our trial bureau, working in court with different individuals, coming into contact with all sorts of people through victims, defendants, witnesses, police officers, and in our appellate bureau as well. So what I think is important about that background is coming into contact with a diverse group of people and dealing with different challenging situations. And throughout that whole time, I've been an individual that has been able to listen, to be compassionate, and make effective decisions. And also tied into the prosecutor part, I think is what's important is the prosecutor, the job isn't just to get a conviction, it's a minister of justice. And in that role, we have to be cognizant of basically virtually everything in the courtroom, everybody. It's not just your witnesses, not just the victim. You can't tread on the defendant's rights. You have to respect them. So I think that is a good training ground for transitioning to be a judge. I've done that for years, almost 24 years as a prosecutor. And as a judge, you have to be cognizant of everybody in the courtroom, treat them all with dignity and respect, the different competing interests, and make sure that you're assessing that and keeping it all in mind. So I think my background as a prosecutor would transition to that, and it would be a transition, but I think that would be a solid background to go forward.
Thank you.
Morning.
Morning.
What level of importance would you place on fairness and equity as a judge? And how would you measure your success in being fair and equitable?
I would place it as a paramount importance for a judge. And how I would assess it is to go in with the idea that I'm going to be fair and impartial, treat everybody with dignity and respect, and give them a full and fair opportunity to be heard. So I think how you assess that is routinely keeping an eye on what you're doing and make sure that you are living up to what you're saying. They're not just buzzwords. To make sure that regardless of whether it's a domestic violence case, it's a trespass, it's a speeding ticket, it's a DUI, and regardless of who's before you, who the witnesses are, who the individual is, that you're fair and equitable to all of them. And how you would gauge it also is to make sure that you are giving a sentence, a disposition that is timely and that is tailored to that case, so you're not going to set the person up for failure. For example, if the person is of lower means and it's not a mandatory sentence, you can set a reasonable goal, so you're not setting them up where they're just going to be coming back into your court again and again. And so I don't think you're being fair and equitable if you're just giving a harsh sentence for the sake of that harsh sentence. You're not actually assessing the individual before you.
Mr. Smith, in conclusion, as you know, we are interviewing several very qualified candidates today, including yourself. What would you like us to know about you that sets you apart in terms of being appointed to the bench?
Well, I would just like you all to know that I'm somebody that's committed and passionate about both the city of Phoenix and this bench. And the reason why I'm committed and passionate about that is I was born and raised in Phoenix. I've either lived in Phoenix or worked for all my life except when I was in law school. And that passion for the city, working out there in the community and working as a prosecutor with the interest in public safety, as well as my knowledge and working closely over the years with the court, working in the city of Phoenix court, I believe that I have a unique wealth of knowledge and experience with that, with the 24 years and the working in all the different bureaus. I think that would bring to bear an important background for working on the bench.
Thank you. Thank you for your time this morning. We're grateful for your responses to our questions. Are we good to continue? All right. So Mr. Bell, well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bell. You've got water?
I do, thank you.
Very good. We have about half a dozen questions for you this morning, and we expect the interview will run in the neighborhood of 15 minutes. So, all right, we'll proceed.
Good morning, Mr. Bell. Congratulations on making it this far in the process. I'd like for you to tell us about an ethical dilemma that you have faced in your life, whether it's personal or professional, but also about how that changed you as a person.
Years ago, in my practice at the Attorney General's office, I was working in the dependency unit. That is a, by all accounts, strange place to get a start practicing law. There's a strange dichotomy that exists in representing the state agency, DES, it was CPS now, DCS, because of the way its case managers, where they sort of fall into that process. They act both as the agents of the agency, which is my client. They are also having intimate and direct contact with the parents, the people who are struggling with taking care of their children, having that direct contact with them and making decisions for how their specific cases will be handled. In the practice, there is an understanding that when there isn't really a contested matter pending, no trial, nothing like that, that the opposing counsel can feel free to call up the DCS case managers, the agents, and learn about whatever it is that they'd like to ask about. That changes, though, when there is something contested, when there is a trial. I had a situation where one of the defense counsel was engaging in direct communications with the case manager after the contested events began, and they weren't supposed to be doing that. And I wasn't quite sure at first how to handle that, but what I decided was I would address it in email, because that was the form that they took with the DCS case manager, and it was the way that it was brought to my attention. The case manager forwarded those emails to me. And I responded by explaining to my opposing counsel that it seemed that something might have gone amiss in our practice, the way we normally do things, and certainly that they understood that there were ethical guidelines to follow here. And I gave a citation to that, as I tend to do. And after that, I said, you know, I really think this is as simple as copying me on the email the next time we're in this sort of space in a case, and you want to contact the case manager, just copy me on it. I think it was well received. I didn't get any response from that particular defense attorney. I didn't hear back from the case manager that there was anything more persistent. And so that resolved it for me, that it was not necessarily intentional or anything like that. In terms of my outlook on the practice or on ethics, it helped to formulate or guide my perspective that just because something might look off or even awful at the start doesn't necessarily mean that there was something malicious, something ill-intended, something unethical actually at work. And so I try to use that perspective, I have used that perspective, frankly, going forward.
Thank you.
I have a factual scenario to tell you about. I just want you to listen to the factual scenario and then kind of tell me how you would approach that and what kind of issues you see within that factual scenario. So assume that you are, in fact, the City of Phoenix judge. You are down at the IA court, jail court as they call it, and it's 2 o'clock in the morning and you have an individual appear in front of you. He's charged with a criminal offense. It is a domestic violence offense, and he appears in front of you. As you talk with him, you have some concerns about his competency and his ability to proceed, but nonetheless, he is talking with you and he is adamant that he wants to resolve the matter both for himself and the victim and get moving with his life and the case. How would you approach that situation and what would you do?
There are a number of concerns at play. First and foremost, you have somebody who is criminally charged, and they have many rights that need to be taken into consideration. Their right to remain silent being one key one that immediately comes to mind. There's also the likelihood that they are entitled to representation based on the facts as you've laid them out. Those facts also, it sounds as though they're speaking perhaps a little bit too much, but in that is also raised perhaps a Rule 11 concern, all of which would need to be sorted out by someone other than the officer, the judicial officer, hearing that particular matter. As it's a domestic violence situation, as you outlined, there are also victim rights implications that need to be taken into consideration on the whole. Ultimately, in this scenario, I think the most appropriate course would be to impose a small delay, understanding that the charged person's right to a speedy resolution is his right. If that's the ultimate outcome, that's fine, but we need to make sure we get there the right way, procedurally speaking. We'd impose a small delay and assign counsel so that any of those underlying Rule 11 concerns, for instance, could be addressed. And in the meantime, it would also give the state's attorney an opportunity to make contact with the victim because he or she has a right to be heard as well. And we want to know that information as well.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Bell. I have a multi-part question for you. You've had the opportunity now to practice for several years in the Phoenix Municipal Court. Do you think the court has a role to play in the broader community? And if so, what do you think that role is? And finally, what role do you think individual judges have in the broader community?
If I may, I will answer in the inverse. Judges are supposed to be pillars of the community. They're supposed to be exemplars within the community. Based on a number of factors, for whatever reason, judges are often venerated, maybe because of the amount of schooling, the education, but they're also viewed as people who can be fair, play right down the middle, and hear both sides of an equation, so to speak. They should play that role, and I think that's where the judicial canons sort of come into play. They are a nice reminder, as it were, of how we should conduct ourselves in the community. And I think that judges do that through their courts, through their divisions, hopefully on a daily basis, in the hearings that they hold, and in the conduct and their conduct from the bench with every individual who comes before them. We, in the city of Phoenix, I know, as I practice there, have sometimes very large dockets, and it's my hope that the very last person being heard that day never thinks that something they saw earlier in that calendar is going to affect them. That if another person who had to see the court did not do something that was ordered or had a similar situation that didn't go well for that person, that they are also going to suffer the same fate. The role of the court, to the extent that it can go out into the broader community affirmatively, I think should do so, because that is the place where people end up only because they're compelled there or because they couldn't resolve whatever that underlying issue was on their own. And they need to know that there is a place where they can seek redress. And that's, in our system, that's the court.
Morning, Christian.
Morning.
Phoenix has a very diverse population. What strategies would you use as a judge to ensure that every individual that appears before you feels that they were treated fairly?
I've seen a number of times from a number of different experiences where people come back and they said they didn't understand that, whatever that is. or that it wasn't told to them, whatever that it was. I'd hope that in my courtroom, never to have a situation like that, although, I mean, you know, what are the odds, right? That said, I have also seen situations where folks have been allowed to speak their piece, and I think that's the right way to go. Sometimes they just need to get it out, whatever, again, that it is. And hopefully, in having that opportunity, they are satisfied. Hopefully, they still also comport with whatever the court has required of them, but hopefully they feel satisfied having had that opportunity. Again, the court is the last refuge for many folks, and this is their opportunity to be heard.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Morning.
What element in your background and experience do you feel will be the most significant to becoming a good judge?
I have practiced the way I have for about 13 years now in civil and criminal litigation, trial practices, going into courtrooms virtually every day of the week to learn how things are supposed to go. When I came to the city of Phoenix, I had the opportunity to actually interact with people, quite frankly. Now, I was speaking about DCS earlier. Of course, the case managers are people and whatnot, but the ones that they are working with, I was removed from. Here at the city of Phoenix, I have worked directly with pro se defendants. I have worked with victims of crime. And that has given me some insight into how these cases actually affect real people every day. I apologize.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Putting the two together from the broad education experience I have with the practical experience, I think is the thing that you're asking about. It is the thing that makes me both ready and prepared to give that opportunity to the people who would come before me. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
What level of importance would you place on fairness and equity as a judge? And how would you measure your success in being fair and equitable?
Well, fairness and equity are paramount. Again, that's why people go to the court. More so on a the civil side of things, but certainly for criminal defendants coming before them, our entire institution is based on the premise that they have a shot. Otherwise, what are we doing, right? I apologize. Can you tell me the second prompt?
How do you measure your success in being fair and equitable?
Well, you know, the litigants, the attorneys who come before me, I expect will not be shy about that when it comes to our JPRs, or I think it's something different. It's called something different in Superior Court and our court at Phoenix, but essentially they are the same, the judicial performance reviews. They are anonymous. They want, the court administration rather wants to know how are the judges doing on the substantive law, applying the rules, so on and so forth. And there are comment sections for those things that the general questions don't address. I'm not naive, and I've been around a while. I also know that there's the water cooler talk, so to speak. And I expect to hear about myself if I've messed something up. One, because I don't want to mess up, and if I can correct it, I certainly will, but also for any future instances to do better as I go forward in my career as a judicial officer.
So, Mr. Bell, in conclusion, we are interviewing a number of highly qualified candidates today, including yourself. What would you like to leave us with in terms of what you think sets you apart in this application process, this appointment process?
Well, I did say before, I've been in trial practice my entire career. My entire career has been public service oriented, and being in courtroom, again, to exercise the rules, the case law, to anticipate what my opposing colleagues will say, to anticipate what the court is going to inquire about, to advance that, that agenda. During the course of my career, I have always sought to exercise different muscles, as it were. When I was still at the AG's office managing that particular caseload, working in high volume, fast paced practice, I sat for the California State Bar. I passed that, and the Honorable Judge Gama, he's retired now, he swore me in about 10 months after my second godson was born, which is how I remember when I was sworn into California. Along the same lines, after practicing at the City of Phoenix for several years, I took on another project. I had heard all my life how my grandmother had gone to Temple University, and in an effort to sort of, again, exercise different muscles, I was looking into different LLM programs, master's programs, and I just so happened to find that Temple had one that was particularly relevant to me. It was in trial advocacy. Which is a slight misnomer. I would suggest it's more about trial practice as it could apply, and there have been judges who have enrolled in the program as well. Over the last year, I completed that program. I graduated this past May. My kids got to walk the stage with me and sort of see that special moment for us. That drive to be able to balance both my work life with my outside interests happening to just so happening rather to dovetail in with my professional outlook, and also managing 3 young kids at the same time, I think is one thing that sets me apart. I know virtually all of the candidates, I would say, and all fine people. But I know that I'm different in having gone through the LLM program. I know I'm different having done it while maintaining my full-time responsibilities at the City of Phoenix Prosecutor's Office and managing a household with 3 young kids, although my wife is my savior many times over, because it's definitely a joint thing, handling the kids.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time this morning. We've enjoyed getting to know you.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
We good to go on to the next candidate? All right. Ms. Carrie.
Morning.
Good morning, Ms. Carrie. Thank you for coming this morning. We have about a half dozen questions for you, and we expect that the interview will run in the neighborhood of 15 minutes. So we can proceed.
Good morning, Ms. Carrie. Congratulations on making it this far in the process.
Thank you.
The first question we have for you is that we would like for you to tell us about an ethical dilemma that you have faced in your life, whether it be personal or professional, but also how that changed you as a person.
Well, I think that it's fair to say that all of us have dealt with some type of an ethical dilemma from our early years in life. One of the things that I'm always happy to point to are the way that my family was brought up, and with a moral compass, sometimes you have to lean to other individuals if it's something that is beyond your experience or possible professional experience. If anyone is saying that they haven't had to face that dilemma, they're probably not being honest with others, but mostly with themselves, right down to the cookie jar, or getting up to a telephone booth and seeing that someone left a wallet there. So in the criminal justice arena, we deal with people all the time that have had to face their own ethical dilemmas. The way that I deal with them is basically to make sure that what I do is setting an example, not just for my family and myself, but for my peers. I generally take the high road. If I've got a difficult situation in my past and someone has described the way that I handled it, and such as grace under fire, then I think I've done a pretty good job. The legal field is challenging, so the ethical dilemmas occur at very different levels. I think I wouldn't have enough time to talk about the times that I've had to contemplate, but my first choice is almost always to take the high road.
Thank you.
Good morning. I have a factual scenario to give you. If you could just listen to that factual scenario, and I'm just going to ask you how you would approach that or issues you see within that factual scenario. So assume you are a City of Phoenix judge, you're down in jail court, it's the middle of the night, and you have an individual come in to you charged with a criminal offense, and it's a DV offense. So there's a victim. And as you talk with that individual, you have some concerns about his competency and his ability to proceed. Additionally, though, however, he is adamant that he really wants to resolve this matter both for himself and his family and get the case resolved and move on. So as that judge sitting there, how would you handle that, or what issues do you see?
Well, I would hope that there's an attorney representing the individual that's being in a better position to screen the person. Obviously, if a judge has concerns about the competency of an individual, then despite the fact that individuals may want to proceed with their case or they want to resolve it or get it over with, what's going to happen down the road because of that attempt to just get it over with, everyone has to deal with. So I think the best way to proceed is to make sure that you're comfortable that there is not a competency issue. And if there is, that's why we have specialty courts, and that's why we have individuals that we rely on in our community, in the criminal justice system, and here in the City of Phoenix to help us with that burden. But I would say the continuance, if I'm not comfortable that someone is not competent, I will not take a plea.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Morning, sir.
So, Ms. Carrie, you've practiced for a number of years in the Phoenix Municipal Court. Do you think that the court has a broader role to play in the community? And if so, what do you think that is? And then what do you think is the role of individual judges in the broader community?
I believe that all of us in the legal community have a role. We are perceived in different ways. Unfortunately, we all know that while we're practicing in this arena, that there's always going to, not always, but most often, there's going to be someone that's going to be happier than someone else. That's why it's an adversarial system. I think that the judiciary has a responsibility to try and stay out of the highlights to avoid any bad exposure. And the best way to do that is to serve the community by setting good examples with good work ethics and calm, and trying not to react to things, because the way that we carry ourselves in the legal community, in the judiciary, is how people perceive the system. So if we're overreacting or behaving irresponsibly to some of the worst political situations or otherwise, then we're exposing ourselves, and it's not really going to be good for the community in itself. We do have an obligation, though, to show that the judiciary is being fair and even, and there certainly are some things that we're able to do, which I know you know the court has done, the CAP program, the driver's license court. We've done good things here. And I think we set good examples. I remember when the Veterans Court, the stand down was very small, and now it's very large. So I hope that we can continue to see that, not just spreading in the county, in the state, but outside of the state. We set good examples, and we should continue doing that.
Good morning, Kathleen. Phoenix has a very diverse population. What strategies would you use as a judge to ensure every individual that appears before you feels that they were treated fairly?
I think it's safe to say that our country has a very diverse population, not just Phoenix. I'm fortunate that my family lived in areas that, while they may have been pockets of cultures, we blended very well together. On Sundays, you went over to the Italian side to see how the pasta was being made. On Wednesdays, you went over to the Irish side to see how the stew was being made. My family brought us up to be colorblind. My experience, both professionally and personally, with the military and all the years that my husband and I have had together, and his community and my community merging, I think the best thing to do is to be colorblind and recognize that we all come from a different place and that we can all evolve to a different level, making people feel that from the beginning that they're not being treated differently. It's a balance. Certainly, knowledge is power, and we have to also understand that everyone that comes before us is not necessarily had a perfect experience, that they come just like our jurors come to us with their experience and their background. I think that making sure that everyone feels that they're getting the opportunity to be heard in their day in court, whether they're a victim, whether they're a defendant, a police officer, lawyers, everybody should be treated with equal balance and objectivity, and I think that's probably the best way to handle diversity. Diversity is not just about where you come from. It's where you've been, and it's where you're willing to go.
Morning.
Morning, sir.
What element in your background and experience do you feel will be the most significant to becoming a good judge?
I'm confident in saying that I've prepared for it. I know that my peers, my adversaries in the courtroom and the bench have looked at it and have started to see that I'm ready for it. It's something that I've been planning for my whole legal career. I've evolved along the way and made sure that I've planned by getting some experience as a judge pro tem in the Superior Court, from very early on handling very, very large, high-paced calendars, not being afraid to ask for guidance. I think that's one of the most important things that we do in the legal community, is help one another and mentor others, so I hope that I'll find the right mentors. I've led by example. I know that at least more than a few of my peers have said something that I think is the highest compliment, and that is that when I do become a judge, that it will be a loss to their community, but it will be a gain to the judiciary. And I think that's the best thing that I can have anyone say about me. I think I'm happy with that.
Good afternoon. What level of importance would you place on fairness and equity as a judge? And how would you measure your success in being fair and equitable?
I've been asked by my peers about my opinion or my position or what I thought should have happened. Again, it goes back to when people start looking at you in a different light. And it's sometimes uncomfortable to say, I don't agree with your position. I don't think that the judge ruled the way that you think he shouldn't have or she shouldn't have. I think some of the things, or I believe that some of the things that we have to do when we're in that position is to start from the middle. I mean, we all come with our own backgrounds and our own histories, but each person in front of you, even though they may be charged with the same exact case that you've heard 5 times before and 5 times after. Everyone's case is different, and their lives are different, and the results are different. We have sentencing guidelines that we have to follow when there's an appropriate sentence that gives someone an opportunity to rehabilitate and restore victims. I would hope that that's where most of the places that I'll start from. And then there are going to be cases, as I've already had in front of me, where the individual's been given opportunities and they're clearly not performing the way that they should, and then it requires a strong hand. So I do think that becoming someone that's willing to listen to all sides objectively and not start on one particular place and not be willing to move. And I've certainly, just like others have, started where I thought one place would be, and after I've heard others' versions or listened openly and been more open to hearing that I've even seen it's pretty easy to change if you're just open and objective and recognize that it's not just one person. We have the community, we have a lot of variables that have to be taken into consideration, and everybody's day in court is important.
Thank you.
I have one more question for you, but one of our members had to step out real briefly, so I'll have a sip of water and we'll just wait for him to return. I want to make sure he hears the answer to your question.
Could have happened to me. I would think so.
In conclusion, as you know, we have the pleasure of interviewing many highly qualified candidates today, such as yourself. What would you like to leave us with, to thinking about what sets you apart in this application and appointment process?
I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I believe that when we look at ourselves and our past, one of the things that people see in me is that I'm not afraid to work, and I work hard. I've often been described as someone that they're not sure where my energy comes from. I think my energy comes from my system and the upbringing that I have, and that is that you give everything that you have your best. My peers certainly have gotten accustomed to coming to me for guidance. I've heard my adversaries say that they thought that if they needed an attorney, I would be the person they came to, and they weren't surprised for me to say that I hope they never needed an attorney. I think that we have an obligation as attorneys, not just to carry ourselves in such a way, but to set by example. And I know that I'm not the kind of person that's ever going to be just going to work, checking in and checking out. In the beginning, I'm sure there won't be too many opportunities for me to step up to a leadership role, but I would expect that I'm the type of person that's always going to be relied on 24/7. That's just the person that I've always been. It's the person I'll always be. And I know that my experience, I wasn't an attorney at the time, but my experience with the prosecution and at national levels and high-profile positions and high-profile cases, including being the person dropping the pilot program and the legislation for the Asset Forfeiture Act at a very young age, working at a very young age, and working my way up to this point in my life. I think that the difference between myself and others is that I've always prepared for it. And I'll always be prepared as best as I can, and I'll take every day as the best day and could be the last day. I tell attorneys frequently that I'm mentoring, and that's another responsibility that I think we have to one another, and that's what improves the legal community, and that's making and setting examples that people can follow and that they look to. One of the worst things that we can do is to embarrass one another. So that means taking the time to offer someone the help and making sure that they're getting what they need, not just working through the day and getting through it. And I can assure you that that's the one thing I'm certain no one will ever say about me.
Thank you for your answer. Thank you for your time this morning. We've enjoyed getting to know you.
Thank you.
Our next interview will be with Ms. Jones. Good morning, Ms. Jones.
Good morning.
Interesting process. We hear so much about people, and some of us have not ever laid eyes on you, so nice to meet you. We have about half a dozen questions for you this morning, and we expect that the interview will run in the neighborhood of 15 minutes or so.
Okay.
You've got water?
I did. I brought some just to always prepare.
I think there's another bottle there that
Bottle.
I think is unopened.
Good morning. Good morning still, yes. Hi.
Good morning.
Congratulations on making it to this part of the process.
Thank you.
So the first question we have for you is we'd like for you to tell us about an ethical dilemma that you faced. It could be personal or professional, but also tell us about how it may have changed you as a person.
A dilemma that I faced, it was about 10 years ago. I was supervisor of the Probation Violation Bureau, and I was in charge of specialty courts as well, and this was a drug court case. And my attorney came to me and he said, I received an email from the judge. Normally in specialty courts, it's a team approach, but we were getting ready to go back to an adversarial process and have a witness violation hearing for a defendant because he had violated several terms. And he said, I received an email from the judge concerning the hearing. And when he forwarded it to me, I looked at the email and I realized the public defender was not on the email. It was only us. And then he had a second email that he forwarded to me. And he says, I don't know what to do. I said, well, don't respond yet. I said, the public defender is not on the email. This is an ex parte communication. I said, first of all, let's go talk to the public defender and see if he has received information. Perhaps he received a later email or something else from the judge. So we went and talked to him in person. I said, did you receive any information concerning this hearing on the case that we have? And he says, no. And I said, well, we received an email from the judge about the hearing and witnesses that she was particularly interested that would be called. I said, I think we need to go address this with the judge this afternoon. And so we went and met with her in chambers, and I said, Your Honor, my attorney received an email. Did you email the public defender, or was there something we missed? We just wanted to see what was going on, and she said she had. I said, well, Your Honor, you've only emailed us. That's an ex parte communication. I believe it's best that you recuse yourself on this matter and let another judge handle it. And she said no. And from there, a motion was filed to remove her for cause. And it was difficult at first for all of us because this was a judge that we appeared in front of on a regular basis. We were in a courtroom every week. So of course that's always difficult. But our concern was, one, it was the impropriety. And even when I spoke with her, or when we spoke with her, we said, Your Honor, how's a defendant going to feel? It looks like you've made up your mind. If you're talking to the prosecutor about the case, how does that look? Even if it's an inadvertent email, it wasn't intentional, but how does that look? It doesn't look like it's going to be fair to the defendant. So in the long run, the presiding criminal judge did remove her for cause. And what that taught me was, even though you face difficult situations, because that was something new. I was a new supervisor. I had never dealt with that before. I had been a practicing attorney, but I'd never had to deal with any type of issues of that nature. I knew what the rules called for, but now it was actually something I had to make a decision, and we had to make the right decision. And I learned from that, and I taught my attorneys. I said, well, this is, it's a difficult position, but we have to follow the rules and we have to follow the law.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So I have a factual scenario for you. I'd just like you to listen to the factual scenario and then tell me how you would proceed in that matter, as well as any other issues or anything else that you see that you think that would be relevant to that factual scenario.
All right.
So assume you are a City of Phoenix judge. You are sitting down in their jail court, which is kind of like a I-8 court, and 2 o'clock in the morning, an individual comes in, they're charged with a domestic violence offense, so it's a victim crime. And as you talk to that individual, you see that you have some issues regarding whether they are competent to proceed or not. But nonetheless, that individual really wants to plead guilty. He wants to plead guilty to you right there. He wants to resolve the matter, both for himself and for the victim, and move on with the case, which sometimes people in jail court do, plead guilty right there to the judge. How would you proceed in that matter, and what other types of issues do you think are relevant to any determination that you would make?
If I was concerned about there might be some competency issues, I would be looking, first of all, to appoint an attorney to represent him. I'd be appointing public defender services. I'd also be looking at possibly the Rule 11 process, because even though this person wants to move forward, I know what the rules are, and a person has to be competent before they can do anything. So I'd be concerned and want to make sure that there are no mental health issues going on that needs to be addressed, because he can't plead, he can't have a trial, he can't do anything until we determine that he's actually competent to go through the process, and also to assist his attorney in representing him. So I would want to make sure of that. And I would tell him, sir, I understand you want to get the process over, however, you do have constitutional rights, and I have to make sure those are protected. That is my job, and so I have to thoroughly make sure that has been satisfied before we move forward. That's not his decision, that would have to be my decision.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Do you think that the court has a role to play in the broader community? And if so, what do you think that is? And then what do you think is the role that individual judges have in the broader community?
Oh, definitely. I think that the court has a role in the community. Judges are a fabric of the community. Excuse me. We don't work in a vacuum, so this is not a separate part of anything. What you do affects the community. Every case that comes through, it affects every person, whether they be the defendant, a victim, a witness, an officer, and the community at large. And the other part of the judge is also to protect the community. So the court has a big responsibility. Judges, an individual judge or any judge, that the community only sees what's there. And they may not ever see anyone else, but they may see one particular judge, and that judge is representative of the judicial system. And so it's very important that the judge has integrity, competent, and is seen throughout the community. A lot of times I think there are things on TV that people see and they think, well, judges just put people in jail. They see only the bad things, or they're taking away their kids, or something that's negative. So it's very important that judges also are positive, that are seen as educating, that are seen at the schools. No, I'm not the same. Yes, that's part of the job. It comes with it. You have to incarcerate. I have to make some very tough decisions. But you're also there to educate people as well, and to explain the process about them and let them see what a judge does and what's important about that. So it's very important that judges see that. And in particular, in city judges, because many times people are not represented by attorneys. So when they come to court, that judge may be the only person they see as part of the criminal justice system. And that may be the only time and the only takeaway. So what they see the judge, whether it's on the bench or they see the judge at a community function, then they'll be able to say, I saw that judge. And they're impressed with that because they see the integrity and the character that the judge has.
Hey, Frankie. Phoenix has a very diverse population. What strategies would you use as a judge to ensure that every individual that appears before you feels that they were treated fairly?
First of all, I think it's very important. I know a lot of the calendars are heavy, so I think it's important, first of all, to greet everyone and to make them feel personable, not that they were just a part of the process, but that actually this is their case and it's important to them, and therefore I'm taking time to spend time with them. Diversity, it is important because, as I said earlier, the judges and the bench, they represent the fabric of the community, so it's important for someone to see various members of the bench, whether it's racial diversity, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation. They need to see that everybody can be a member of the bench, and therefore the community is represented. Because sometimes if they only see certain individuals, they may feel like, well, maybe this judge really doesn't have my interest, or the bench as a whole doesn't have the interest because they don't see anybody that looks like them or perhaps thinks like them. So it's important to show the makeup of the community. The community is made up of all people, and it's important that the bench reflect that.
Thank you.
Good morning. I have. Good morning.
What element in your background and experience do you feel?
If you could repeat that, I heard it, but it.
The green light's on.
Okay.
What element in your background and experience do you feel will be the most significant to becoming a good judge?
One thing is being a good listener and being able to distinguish facts before making a decision. And I've had to do that on several occasions. I've done that as a prosecutor for the last 20 years when I'm making decisions on what a plea to give or a deviation, which is something when someone is looking at going to prison and deciding whether or not we should give them a different plea offer or do something different, handle the case differently because they're giving information that says that they're going to do better and to improve. Other things that I look at is I've been a mother of two now, they're adult sons, but I think back to my boys were teenagers and when they were young boys dealing with the disputes as they'd come home. But I know they're saying this one did something to me or they're complaining about something, but being able to listen and say, okay, now what did your brother say? Well, what did you do before that? And start to ascertain those questions and ask that and get to the root of the matter before making a decision. And it just involves listening. Also for the last 20 years, I've also been a Sunday school teacher and I work, my area or the children that I teach is 9 to 13 years old. So I deal a lot of times with various issues. They have things, they come in, they've had problems, sibling issues at school, and they want to talk about those things. And sometimes it will have nothing to do with a lesson in particular, but then I think, no, it is part of the lesson because that's part of life, is to listen and I had to understand and to deal with that. And for them, that was a situation they had to deal with, and they can't move any further. They're not going to listen to anything I had to say if they just had a fight with their brother before coming to church that morning. So it's being able to listen to various things and handle it and realizing something it may be small to others, but it's big to them. And that's what I've also learned as an attorney. A lot of times when I've handled cases, what may seem to be we call a routine matter, it's not routine to somebody else. That's an important case to them. If they got a traffic ticket, that ticket is bothering them. They stayed up all night worrying about what they're going to say when they come to court. Is anyone going to listen? And they want to tell their story, and that's important to them. And you've got to be a good listener. And I've done that over the years, just in everything that I do. And being a judge is no different because you can handle one matter, you can handle others.
Good afternoon.
Good morning. Well, I guess it's afternoon.
What level of importance would you place on fairness and equity as a judge, and how would you measure your success in being fair and equitable?
I think it's very important to be fair and equitable because, as I stated earlier, when people come before a judge, they're expecting their case to be heard and handled fairly and that they're going to be able to give a chance. They want to come in. For example, if a defendant has been charged with a crime, they're going to expect the judge is going to listen to them and not just side with the prosecutor or side with the officers or side with the witnesses. They're hoping that they get to tell their story and be able to be heard fairly and to be able to know that they're going to be treated fairly. And it's very important because if they come in and they feel like, wow, everything was just stacked against me, the officers, the witnesses, the prosecutor didn't listen to me, and then when they come before the judge, if the judge didn't listen to me or they feel the judge didn't listen to them, then they feel like, well, it wasn't fair and equitable. It was just stacked from the beginning and I never had a shot. I never had a prayer. And so it's very important for judges to be that level field. What I've explained to people before is the judge it's like the referee in a baseball game, or like the umpire or referee in a football game is, I'm not taking any sides, but you want to listen, you're making sure that everything is fair. The rules are followed, the evidence comes in fairly, and that the person feels like they have a fair shake at that. What I've done in my background as I look back in the years that I've done criminal law, and I've done criminal law for about 20 years now, or actually it's like 22 years. And in particularly being a prosecutor, I've had to look at cases. I've looked at how to charge them. There are different ways you can charge a case. It can have prosecutorial discretion, but you have to look at, the fairness of it. The first thing also is when we charge cases as a prosecutor, the first thing is the Constitution is very important. So I'm looking at, were there any Fourth Amendment violations? Are there any Fifth Amendment violations? Were there any issues? And that's what a judge has to do. And so I feel like I've done that in my background because I've had to review all kinds of cases and make determinations of how to handle matters. And I've done that for many, many years in dealing with criminal cases, and they're felony cases as well as misdemeanors. So I feel I do have the experience in doing that.
Ms. Jones, in conclusion, as you know, we are interviewing many highly qualified candidates today, including yourself. What would you like to leave us with in terms of what you think sets you apart in this appointment process?
Well, y'all looked, I do have my experience, obviously, as an attorney and as a prosecutor, as a litigator. I also have been, the past 13 years, I worked as a manager. So not only did I handle cases, but I also looked at how to handle cases from all levels and different parties. For example, on the committees that I served at the Superior Court, I worked with the Public Defender's Office and the Probation Department and the Clerk of Court and the Judiciary. And a lot of times we had to see how to make our calendars run better if there were issues. For example, when I was in probation violation, our calendars were heavy, and so we would have to look at, we've got a lot of matters, how can we simplify it? How can we make it run more efficient? How can we make it run better? Because we had to get a lot of cases through. Other things that in my background is I've always enjoyed teaching, and that's one thing I enjoy, whether it's obviously with children for many, many years, but also I feel like being a judge is being an educator, and it's explaining things. And that's one thing that I feel is very important on a day-to-day things, explaining things to people. And that's one thing that I've done on all the cases that I've handled. Other thing that I've looked at is I have done teaching at the state bar conventions for many years, and one of the things was I've served on the UPL committee, and that was an interest to me. It started when I was doing immigration law, and the reason I saw how some of my clients were not being treated fairly and how people were taking advantage of them. So those are things I was concerned about, and I wanted to teach and help lawyers and learn what to do and what not to do and how to be better lawyers and how to make the bar better. So I feel with that, and then the other committees that I've served on the Commission on Minorities, is learning about diversity, but then thinking how I can bring that to the bench. And so all of what I've done, it's not that I do it because it's something to do, but it's something that I have a passion for, and I've always enjoyed working with people and serving people, and I've had my career in public service, and I feel I can continue, because what I've learned, whether I'm teaching at the bar or the committees that I've served on, I can bring that to the bench and make the bench better and make it more viable and make it better for the future and improve things and be good for the community to be able to show that and make it stronger. And everything that I've done, I've always served with integrity, and I give it 110% of everything that I do, whether I'm teaching, whether I'm working on a case, whether I'm preparing for a presentation, whether I'm giving a presentation, or whether I'm doing a trial. I always give my best, and it's not of what I do, but it's who I am, and I bring that same integrity and personality with me, and I will do that as a judge.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jones. We've enjoyed getting to know you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
We'll finish up this morning's session with Ms. Hernandez.
morning.
Good morning. You've got water with you?
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Hernandez, we have a half dozen or so questions to ask you this morning, and we expect the interview will take in the neighborhood of 15 minutes or so.
Okay.
So, you ready?
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Adele?
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
Congratulations on making it this far in the process. The first question we have of you is that we'd like for you to tell us about an ethical dilemma that you've had in your life, and it could be personal or professional, but also tell us about how facing that ethical dilemma changed you as a person.
As a prosecutor, the very first thing that came to my mind when you said that was I was in a position where, twice, but really mostly one time, I had a case I was prosecuting, and the investigation was okay the way it was done. It could have been done a little bit better. And I was listening to the defendant's jail calls, and she was very adamant to her mother that she was not guilty. She did not do this, and it was a serious crime. It was a shooting, and she had a rap sheet that it wouldn't surprise me if she committed the shooting. Long story short, I myself went to follow up on certain things that she was saying, and I reached out to a witness, and I spoke to that witness, and I realized I really think we have the wrong person sitting in custody. So obviously that's a huge problem for a prosecutor. So I went to my supervisor, and I said, hey, look, we need to dismiss this case because I think we have the wrong person. And I explained to him why, and he agreed, and we ended up dismissing the case. It just made me realize that things aren't always as one or two people might say that they are. And you really need to kind of listen to people when they're talking. It may not be to you, but if you hear something, excuse me, and you think that it's worth looking into, it's probably worth looking into. So I was really happy about how that turned out.
Thank you.
I have a factual scenario to give you. I just want you to listen to the factual scenario, and then when I conclude, if you could just tell me about how you think you would handle that and other issues that you see within that. Your factual scenario is that assume that you are, in fact, a City of Phoenix judge. You're down in their arraignment court, their jail court, and an individual comes in who's been charged with a criminal offense. It's a victim crime, a domestic violence offense. And as you talk to that individual as he comes before you for that IA, jail court visit, you have some concerns about his ability to proceed, his competency. With that being said, he is adamant that he wants to resolve the case. He wants to plead to the court and resolve the matter right there and get it over with. How would you proceed in that matter, and what issues or problems or issues do you see?
If I, as a judicial officer, believed that he had some competency issues, I would not be inclined to allow him to go forward and plead to the court. Part of the reason, obviously, that we have the process to determine competency, I believe, is to make sure that when someone is entering into a guilty plea, they understand what they are doing, why they are doing it, and how it's going to affect them. So if I have serious questions about this person's ability to do that, especially without counsel, I'm assuming there's no counsel, I would take whatever steps were necessary to make sure that he is evaluated before he has the ability to enter into a guilty plea or plead guilty to the court.
Thank you.
Morning.
Hello.
I've got a multi-part question for you. First, do you think that the court has a role to play, an appropriate role to play in the broader community? If so, what do you think that is? And then what do you think is the appropriate role of an individual judge in the community?
You said in the broader community? That was your...
Yes.
I do think that the court has a role in the community. As a court, there's a lot of power that the court has with people's lives. I think as well-respected and educated people who are within the court system, I think that we do have some obligation to be involved in the community, whether it be by way of education, working together with law enforcement to try to do something in the community so that maybe we're not seeing as many people come through the courtroom, to be a little proactive in that. And as far as the role of a judge in the community, was that the question? I would say the same thing. I serve on a board of a nonprofit. I think that my skill set as an attorney, prosecutor, even a judge, would be something that is something that I can use to help my community. So I serve on the board of a nonprofit that helps young kids who are in high school trying to, get somewhere in their lives, and we serve primarily, the organization serves primarily an underprivileged population. So I think as a judge, I could help in that regard and say, hi, look, I did this, you can do this too. It's not, I didn't think when I was your age that I would be anywhere where I am today, but I am, and so this is why it's possible for you too, and I'm happy to help you get there in any way. So I think as someone in that position, you can really have a beneficial effect on the community.
Phoenix has a very diverse population. What strategies would you use as a judge to ensure that every individual that appears before you feels that they were treated fairly?
I think that my overall demeanor and disposition would probably help with that a lot. I have been told by defense attorneys that I have worked with, hey, you'd make a really good defense attorney because you really can relate to my client. He was listening, readily and willingly listening to what you are saying, because I tried to touch on this in my application. I grew up in Brooklyn, so I grew up among lots and lots and lots of different types of people. And I learned how to interact with them in a way that was positive. I have faced my own set of obstacles in life. I moved from Brooklyn to New York, or excuse me, from Brooklyn to North Scottsdale halfway through my freshman year of high school. So that was a huge change. It didn't go so well at first, but it ended up fine. So I have had many different things happen to me in my life and have encountered so many different types of people that I just think that I have a way of relating to anybody. I can talk to someone who's homeless, I can talk to someone who's of any age, I can talk to someone from any socioeconomic background, and I think when I have defense attorneys saying, hey, you did really well with my guy, I have an ability to do that. So I think that that would pour over into the courtroom as well. I would treat them the way I treat anybody else, with respect, because they deserve it and so does the process, and I think that I would do well with that.
It's still morning. Good morning. What element in your background or experience do you feel will be the most significant to becoming a good judge?
Probably what I just said. I think that part of being a good judge is being able to relate to people and understand people and different kinds of people, because you have attorneys in your courtroom, so they're very well educated. You have staff in your courtroom who may or may not be well educated. There are jurors in your courtroom who are going to come from a wide variety of backgrounds. There are defendants in your courtroom who are dealing with quite a bit because they're facing criminal charges, and they too probably come from a lot of different socioeconomic backgrounds. So I think that, like I said, my ability to relate to all those different types of people would really help, and I think that that's probably one of the most important things about being a judge. I think you can't just be able to only communicate with one different style or type of person, because you're going to be faced with so many different types of people. So doing that successfully, I think, is really important.
I'm going to disagree with my colleague. I think it's the afternoon, so good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
What level of importance would you place on fairness and equity as a judge? And how would you measure your success in being fair and equitable?
I think that it is hugely important. That probably would have been the second thing that I would have said is very important. obviously, as a judge, you have people's lives in your hands. And really, too, as a prosecutor, the same thing. We have a lot of discretion and a lot of power with what we do. And I would do the same thing as a judge as I try to do as a prosecutor, which is be fair and impartial and come up with what is the appropriate solution for this person who is charged with this crime, who has this criminal history, who has done these things, who is this age, because it is very important. Everyone needs to be treated fairly throughout the criminal justice system. Similarly situated people should be treated in a similar fashion. So I think it's very, very important that a judge is fair and equitable. And I'm sorry, the second part of the question?
How do you measure personally your success in being fair and equitable?
I know that in Superior Court, and I'm sure the same is true for City Court, that there are surveys that are done by people who come through that courtroom. So I would probably take my cue a lot from there. Hopefully people would give feedback, and then, you know, I'm sure there's somebody who's going to get it and go over it with me and say, wow, so many people said this, good or bad. So I would probably measure a lot of my success from that, and also from colleagues. People talk. You know, if everybody who was in front of me if I became a judge and everyone who was in front of me was complaining, I would imagine that might get back to me, and so that would be something that would need to be addressed. Or the other way around, if they said, hey, we really like appearing before Judge Hernandez. It's great.
Ms. Hernandez, in conclusion, we are going to have the pleasure of seeing a number of highly qualified candidates today, including yourself. What would you like to leave us with in terms of what you think sets you apart in this appointment process?
Gosh, I want to say I have worked so hard to be where I am today, but I am positive that is true of everybody who will appear before you. So what I can tell you is this. I love the fact that I have a great relationship with the defense bar. And I would say that is how I measure how I am as a prosecutor. When the defense bar and judges on the Superior Court have good things to say, that makes me feel like I'm doing a good job and I am doing it the right way. And that is true from what I've heard. Hopefully nobody here has heard differently. But that is what I have heard. And I know that there are people in my office who cannot say the same thing. I know that there are probably practicing attorneys out there in all of the different areas of law who can't say the same thing. But I think that feedback really lets me know that I'm doing it well. And if I was appointed as a judge for the city of Phoenix, I would just take the way I do my job with me over onto the bench. And I think that I'm confident that I would serve the city of Phoenix in that capacity, and I would do it well. I would give the bench the respect and the attention that it commands and deserves, because I think it's a really, really important job, probably one of the most important that we have out there. And I would do it as best as I can, and I believe that I would be well respected and well liked on the bench, just as I am as a prosecutor.
Thank you for your answers, and thank you for your time. We've enjoyed getting to know you this morning.
And thank you very much. I really appreciate this opportunity. It was very enlightening and awesome.
Good day. Looks like our lunch has not quite yet arrived. Is that right? I'm sorry. Okay. So in order to make good use of our time, I would propose that we carry on by hearing our due diligence reports on on the afternoon candidates. Is there objection to that, or does anyone like to take a break before then? Okay. Who on the board reported on Ms. Lemke?
I did, Judge.
Thank you.
Ms. Kathy Lemke, currently United States Attorney District of Arizona, started her undergrad career at University of Arizona, then into Chicago, and then completed her law degree at Arizona State in '97. Primarily her role is in firearms, immigration, drugs associated with lead counsel and co-counsel in the 9 federal in the United States Attorney's Office. I reached out to an adversary of Ms. Lemke's, and he mentioned the technical expertise that Ms. Lemke had and her ability to always be fair and stand by her legal opinion. Additionally, I reached out to one of her supervisors, and she also mentioned and highlighted the theme being here, the technical expertise that Ms. Lemke had, and also her ability to educate and teach others. And so that was the overall theme with Ms. Lemke, and a handful of other letters of recommendations came in, and you should have those in front of you as well.
Thank you. Any the questions of Carlos about the report? All right, moving on to Mr. Scarduzio.
I was responsible for doing the due diligence on Mr. Scarduzio. Again, I won't go over the application with you, but he has been a longtime criminal defense practitioner. I believe he already serves as a pro tem for the city of Phoenix. He's done that for a number of years, as well as in other capacities. I did get in contact. I did the same process I did with my other person I did due diligence on, where I put an email out to my bench to see who had had contact with him, either for good or for bad. I did not receive any negative comments. I did have several people who have known him for a number of years indicate that they believed he was a very knowledgeable and well thought out person. He does have some kind of other experience in reffing and other things that kind of make him a little more diverse. And some of those conversations were about that kind of stuff because I knew him more in a personal capacity than a professional capacity.
He's a high school ref.
Yeah, for a number of years.
Football and basketball?
Correct. I did contact his references as well. Most of them got back to me. Not all, but most of them did. I know David Sandweiss, who's with the bar, had a very glowing letter to write about him, who had known him for a number of years and knew him both as a practitioner. They shared offices together, and he had very good things to say in terms of his ability to deal with people and interact with people, and his demeanor, what he would believe his demeanor would be on the bench. And the other references kind of indicated similar things as well. They believe he'd be a good candidate based upon his demeanor, his work ethic, and his substantive knowledge of the law. That was my review of his application and the references that I checked.
Has he been exclusively or nearly exclusively serving as a judge pro tem in city courts for more than 10 years? Is that? It
appears that that is his primary, I don't want to say occupation, but that's what he primarily does. He did have a private practice where he was a criminal defense attorney for a number of years. I remember when, actually I used to have a case with him when he was a defense attorney because I was a prosecutor at that time, and that was quite a few years ago, but he did have a defense practice before he started doing a lot of the pro tem work for various cities.
Questions? After hearing from him, we'll meet again Tina Solomon, who I know we have interviewed before in a few years past. I looked into her background. She's a 1997 grad from Drake Law School. She's been with the city prosecutor's office for 18 years. And I reached out to her references and received many glowing nothing but very positive remarks. Heard from her longtime acquaintances and friends. She's a good listener. She never loses her composure. Like others, I was interested in hearing from her litigation adversaries. And one fellow said that he has practiced against her and with her for 15 years, and says that she's a pleasure to work with. She has a good bird's eye view of cases, very respectful, patient, compassionate, but he said, don't get the feeling that she's a pushover, because she's not a pushover. I asked him about her work effort, and he laughed, saying that you won't find a harder worker than Tina, he said. I spoke to another person, a fellow who has litigated both against her and has negotiated with her, and he called himself a giant fan of her. He said, I thought this was interesting, she says, she's an evil competitor on the mat. She will feed you your own lunch if you come unprepared. But nevertheless, she's the woman you call if you need a little love on your cases. She'll be compassionate, and she wants to achieve justice. One adversary called her one of the best prosecutors in the city's office. She keeps in mind the goal of doing justice. She's not just out to get a conviction. She has a fantastic temperament, doesn't lose her temper, and sees the forest for the trees. Spoke to Eric Jeffrey, Judge Jeffrey, about her, who has had her practice before him for many years, and he has very high praise. Really awesome, he says. She's a very good worker. It would be great to have her on the bench, but we would pay the price in terms of losing her from the prosecutor's office. He calls her one of the strongest lawyers we have. She follows through on everything. She's the glue of the office. I had actually had another person who said, who laughed when I asked him about whether she's a hard worker. That person said, I need to stop myself from giving her everything that needs to be done because she will take it. Good Midwestern roots work ethic, he said. And finally, I talked to another member of the bench who said that she is an exceptional candidate for any judicial position. What this judge calls Ms. Solomon one of the smartest, most competent lawyers that she's ever met. Calm, deliberate, excellent temperament, treats everyone the same, and is very unflappable. So that's what we know about Ms. Solomon. After that, we'll hear about Carla Bastien.
Your Honor, I had Carla Bastien.
Say it again.
Bastien.
Bastien, thank you.
At least that is how I've heard her references pronouncing her name, so I'm going to go with their version of it. I had the pleasure of reviewing her application. She is a graduate, a 1996 bar-admitted graduate of the University of Arizona. And she has practiced for a little over 20 years, largely in criminal law. I have to say that, you know, on paper, I mean, she was a strong applicant, but I really appreciated the references for her because almost all of them responded. And she had a really good cross-section of people who were saying things about her and said really high-quality things with substantive comments. And so I was impressed at who she chose for references and why. And to me, that spoke a lot, that she wasn't just going to put down some random person that might have a good name recognition, although she did have some. Across the board, what I heard about her was that not just her technical competency is extremely impressive, but that she's able to effectively manage a caseload, is able to communicate with a broad range of people, and does it ethically. What came across in everyone that I spoke with was the same themes, is that she knows what she's doing, she does her job well and effectively, and she does it with integrity. One conversation that I had with Judge Dominguez in Surprise, I actually, I think gleaned the most from that conversation, because he has seen her in a variety of different capacities, and he talked about her ability to adapt and to learn and to grow. And I did ask him, I said, one of the things that I would like to know is that Phoenix has a very high volume court. Do you think that she could handle the volume? And he, without hesitation, said absolutely. And he gave a couple of examples that weren't just, a logical extension of somebody who has a high caseload, sure, that they could handle the volume, but that she actually was able to move things along on high volume calendars that he had been in front of before. So I had zero questions or reservations. There was not even a hint of anything that I needed to follow up on or run down further. She was definitely a very solid candidate, and I enjoyed reviewing her due diligence in her application.
Thanks a lot. Mr. Tinker.
Your Honor, I had Mr. Tinker as well. Again, it was a real pleasure. Like I said, I remember Mr. Tinker from when I had cases against him, and it validated some of my memory of working with him as opposing counsel. Is that, and I talked to some of the people who had cases against him as well. Is that he is a straight shooter, and he's even keeled. He doesn't get worked up about things, and he's still able to advocate and communicate his message in a way that is respectful and is still persuasive in dealing with his client, the bench, and opposing counsel. One of the opposing counsel that I spoke with just said that he is the perfect example of what opposing counsel should be, of how you're dealing with somebody and their reasonableness and their knowledge of the law, and their true dedication to their client and doing what's right. I did get some great feedback that he has worked in divisions in the city of Phoenix that are high volume, high pace, and that he has a very good grasp of what this city does and how it needs to get done, and that he would be an excellent representative on the bench here. Again, no reservations at all. He is an extremely solid and well-rounded candidate. And it was an absolute pleasure reviewing his application and doing his due diligence.
Thank you. Our last interview today will be with Ms. Sanchez.
So I was assigned to do the due diligence on Ana Sanchez. She's a sole practitioner, has done work as a judge pro tem, primarily in the area of criminal defense. She's an ASU law graduate in 2004. I spoke to a friend of hers, one of her adversaries, and two judges that she's appeared in front of. Her friend, this was a very meaningful reference. This was the mother of a college friend of hers who was a former prosecutor and a colleague of hers who had sadly passed away. She said that Anna stepped up and helped close his practice up, and also work with the family during that whole process. And she was always very positive and helpful, and said she's always on top of all of her cases. One of her opponents, who said she had known her 5 years, has known her 5 years. They'd been adverse on many occasions. She described Anna as extremely competent and very professional. Said she has amazing people skills, and she thinks she would be an excellent judge. Interestingly, she did not know that she had been listed as a reference, but still said very nice things. She even said that if she had unfortunately ever found herself in a jail cell at 2 a.m. in the morning, Anna is the person that she would call. On the judges, same very positive feedback that The one judge said that Anna was assigned to his court. He said she was a great trial lawyer, cares very deeply about her clients, has a great demeanor, she's kind, humble, unflappable, and then cited to her pro tem experience as how maybe she would do as a judge if appointed to the bench. The other judge also enthusiastically recommended Anna. They worked together when they were both court-appointed attorneys, said she was very professional. They often consulted with each other as colleagues about their matters, and said that if she's appointed to the court, he would gladly give her all of his cases.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you all for your reports. We have come to our lunch break time, so we will break the meeting now, and we will resume at 1 o'clock sharp with our next interview. Thank you.